You're listening to On the Job with PORAC, hosted by PORAC President Brian Marvel and Vice President Damon Kurtz. On the Job with PORAC is your go-to podcast for insights into the challenges and opportunities facing law enforcement professionals here in California and across the nation. Our goal is to provide an inside look at these issues from the perspective of officers who risk their lives to protect and serve their communities.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of On the Job with PORAC. I'm Brian Marvel, President of PORAC, along with Damon Kurtz, Vice President of PORAC. Today we have on the show Wade Stern, President of the Federated University Police Officers Association, FUPOA, and Matt Kroner, State University Police Association President, SUPA. There's been a lot of stuff happening on the campuses in California, so we really thought it would be a good opportunity to bring you two in. Obviously as experts in the field of policing at major universities for California. So obviously we've had a lot of these protests, whether you support them or not support them. The reality is you still have a job to do. Ultimately you have to keep the peace. So with that in mind, why don't you talk a little bit, maybe we'll start with you, Wade, talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the campuses that your officers are patrolling, and then we'll shift over to Matt.
I appreciate it, and thanks for having us. This isn't new, and I've said it before. This has been going on for years, back to the Berkeley free speech movement in the 1960s. You can YouTube anything and see some of the major protests that have occurred since the 1960s, which brought in the National Guard all the way back to Reagan, and now, in leading up to today. So this is really nothing new, and what we're seeing is it comes in spurts. So we may go a year, 2 years, 3 years, even 5 years without anything, and just so happens that this is what's been happening again, and now we have to address it. The problem is when things don't happen on the college campuses, the university tends to kind of forget that it could happen to them, and so we kind of get withered away, so to speak, as far as training, money, and plans in place. And so when they do come, we get hit hard and fast, and it seems like nobody knows what to do and they can't remember. So it's a struggle, which is why back in 2000, the Occupy movement back in 2008, leading up to all the Davis pepper spray incident stuff, created that Robinson-Edley report. So we had a company come in, give us an evaluation, 150 pages, 49 recommendations of what we should do and how to respond together, right? Law enforcement and the university with a tiered response on how to deal with this. And we did, and it's been implemented. But since 2015, moving forward, there hasn't been anything that large to this scale on multiple campuses. And then when it hits, and nobody knows what to do and who's in charge. But at the end of the day, like I'd said before, the campus administration, meaning the chancellors and the vice chancellors and such, and the provost, they call the shots. And they're the ones making the decisions. And law enforcement is hampered by them until they can make a decision. So that's kind of where we're at now. Obviously, policing at a university campus is like no other. We say most of the time that you can take someone from a university campus, police officer with the university, put them into a city or a county, and they'll do great. You take someone from a county or a city and you bring them into the university system, it's going to take a lot of training and patience, because not only are we police officers, but we're advocates for these kids, these 18 to 25-year-olds. That's when a lot of the mental health stuff takes place between 18 and 25. We're trying to get them to graduate also. And so we have a goal, right, with the university. It's not traditional policing, and so that's kind of where we're at with that. So.
Yeah, I had small experience with that. Early in my career, I worked in Santa Barbara and worked with UCSB guys right there in Isla Vista, and any given moment it could kind of just kick off and go sideways. Folks were very emotional about things, obviously, and you still have a job to do, and but they don't necessarily look at it from that perspective. So.
Very true.
Just to piggyback off what Wade said, and before I do that, thank you for bringing light to this. As PORAC, you have a bigger voice than we do, and we appreciate it. Our members do. I think the problem is these university administrators, law enforcement is an afterthought. It's not the priority. The priority is to educate these kids, and they're educators. They're not experts in law enforcement in the least bit, but yet they have the ultimate authority to call the shots, like Wade is saying. And these chiefs, they can't tell you that, publicly, but they're being hampered by, the indecision, the delayed decision making, and what the result is, it's multi-millions of dollars these universities are spending on private security because police are scary and offensive, but an unarmed security guard with no training is less scary. You go to the Humboldt protests, encampment, illegal occupation of the building and takeover, over $2 million in vandalism. We've heard a number between 200 and 400 law enforcement from throughout Northern California. I think the UC police, at the time that started, we had one officer on duty, on patrol. Plus, the chief happened to be there at 4:30 p.m. So the number one thing that I see is we need more funding. We need a minimum number of officers per campus, no matter how small. I think Wade's smallest is Merced. And they tend to base how many officers they have on how big the campus is. But the problem is, if you only have 8 cops, how are you going to do 24/7 coverage? You can't.
Is that where they rely on the security to do the extra work? I mean,
they don't typically. They hire these security. This is kind of a recent phenomenon. Besides special events, sometimes they do, but they're doing it because it's less offensive to the students.
but it's not providing the security that everybody needs.
Absolutely. They're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for these private security guards that have little or no training.
I mean, at the end of the day, these are small cities.
Right.
And they act like small cities. And in fact, you take even this, a small campus like Riverside with 28,000 people, along with 3,000 to 5,000 staff members. That's bigger than a lot of cities nationwide that have full police departments. And they think, and so they look at us as sometimes a necessary evil. They don't prioritize safety. They're the first to say they prioritize safety, but the minute safety has to get involved, it's no longer a priority. When something happens, they have somebody to blame. Remember, the people that run these institutions are academia, and they think from an academia standpoint. They're not thinking from a police standpoint or anything else. And so you're running a small city, and then you tap that with bringing people in from outside, from God knows where. It's going to be a mess. And these are all open campuses. These are not closed private campuses. These are public institutions.
Speaking of that, how much of these current protests are outside entities like activist groups bring in professional agitators? We know in a lot of protests, there's these professional agitators come in there. They're really there to actually make them become violent, make them turn into something they weren't designed to be. And I think sometimes the kids get caught up in the moment. Is that something that's going on now?
Yeah, so basically when it first started at UCLA, a majority of them were not affiliated with the university at all, and then some were. In the one I went to last week, Santa Cruz, which was a complete mess, we made over 119 arrests. Our squad was responsible for all those 119 arrests, and they arrested 4 faculty members, a professional staff member, and 95% of them were students.
Wow.
95% were students, where before over 50% of them were not. But at the end of the day, with everything, we're seeing the same thing. They're being funded by other people outside the university. They have the same color tents. They have the same kind of logistics being set up. They're being fed water, food, and we've even seen the anarchist handbooks. So we even at one point saw in Berkeley, we just went to Berkeley from a building, they had staged all brand new tools, sledgehammers, shears, crowbars, even bricks from a store. And so that's not the students paying for it, because if you ask them, they can't afford anything, and they're starving students. So that's the funding is coming, the plywood and everything is coming in from trucks from the outside. And so it's sad, because then these kids are getting arrested, walking out, and then have no idea. I talked to a bunch of them actually, but Santa Cruz, I pulled them aside, and when I asked them why they did it, their answers were inconsistent, And they really didn't have anything else other than they're being manipulated or pressured by the faculty and other students to be down there. They didn't have any real cause for being there other than end genocide. And they couldn't even explain what is really happening in the Middle East, other than they wanted to be a part of something and they're following a group. And that group is very inviting, and they're good at recruiting, and they have.
It should be a clue when like 50 sheets of plywood are being dropped off by a U-Haul truck that it's a coordinated effort. Like Wade said, these students don't have, a penny to pinch sometimes. They're eating top ramen every day just to get through,
It seems more commonplace now, regardless if it's on a school or where it's at. If there's protests for something, they start out as the idea is peaceful protest, but suddenly there's pallets of bricks and other stuff that are just, they appear there, and no one really gets to see them drop them off, but they're there, and we know they weren't just brought there by the folks that are there for the protest, that are organizing the protest, or these other folks that are there to push a different agenda, and people get caught up, and I think it's sad.
I think the more disturbing thing is that the university is allowing this 50 sheets of plywood to even be dropped off. Yeah. Why isn't there a line of our officers there to stop it?
The problem is the chancellors are calling them peaceful protests, and our chiefs are telling them that it's not peaceful when you bring in plywood. It's not peaceful when you're setting up, fire extinguishers, med tents. They're wearing helmets. They're setting up roadblocks. They're not letting people into there. That is no longer a peaceful protest. It is a war zone waiting for a war to start. And they don't want to admit it, and they don't want to agree to that. And they won't do anything until it's too late. And then you see what happens on TV. That's their fault, because so much was done the weeks leading up to that. And Santa Cruz was a mess also, but leading up to that, they had a lot of opportunity to do it, and the chancellor didn't want to. And so what you saw then was a mess. That's truly all on them.
Well, it comes down to being proactive or reactive, right? We've been dealing with that with our whole careers, and whether you're being proactive or reactive to your policing. And when you're completely reactive, this is what you get, because you're not prepared for what's coming.
The adults in the room are afraid to make the key decisions.
Well, also, are they sympathetic to those people that are out there?
That's the other side of it too.
Like the California Faculty Association, I'm sure they're completely supportive of what's happening on these campuses.
Yeah. They're calling us violence workers. Yep. We're perpetuating sexual violence and all this other outrageous, crazy stuff. It's like,
talk about an organization that's got its compass wrong, its moral compass wrong. But I agree with you in a sense that all of this stuff that's being brought on the campus, that's like immediate red flags and should be addressed immediately. And I guarantee you all those people are probably open borders people, but all of a sudden now they love borders around their little camps, to prohibit people of their free movement on campus. You're seeing the videos, even at UC Davis. The professor's trying to walk through just to go to another class, and they refuse to let him go through.
Yeah, UCLA is going to get sued for not allowing Jews to go through. The crazy thing is when the chancellor, Beck, was being at the congressional hearings, he's Jewish. His kids are Jewish. They're bar mitzvahed. And he knew about Jews not being able to get through certain boundaries or access certain buildings. That is, what's that? That's the political pressure that they're falling to. That's that sympathetic thing that you're talking to. Because even in those congressional hearings, you heard Northwestern University, that guy, that president there, his family were Holocaust survivors, he said. And they allowed this anti-Semitism to fester and fester and get into where it is. So where is it coming from? Because those are the same Jews that are so religious in their own private life, and then they allow this to happen. But it seems like depending on who it is, and I'm gonna call the elephant in the room, depending on which organization, which race, which group, depends on who they're not gonna mess with and who they will.
Yeah.
And it's basically what pressure are the administration gonna get, and then they'll deal with that. So they didn't want to deal with the pressure. They didn't want to deal with that group. It's just
I
simple.
think it's the pendulum starting to swing the other way now. We're seeing some blowback, like Sonoma State, that president was put on admin leave for some kind of agreement he made with a protest group.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And he was basically ultimately decided to retire. But in their effort to appease certain groups, they're totally offending and outrageously so the entire communities, the Jewish community, students, large.
Appeasement doesn't work. We've seen it. History has shown over and over when you appease people, they're just going to take you for more and more. Yeah, it's tragic to see that happening on our campus. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime happening, especially on universities. I get universities being a hotbed of activity and dissent, but what we're seeing now is just the violence, the way the protests are going about doing this is just it's shocking. It's sad to see the chancellors and the university presidents are failing to recognize what's happening. And I think this goes back, you talked about the report that was done in 2008, the fact that you're not as funded as you should be, the fact that we'll just hire security officers to work and support the police, but the reality is you need the police officers more than you need the security, because you can do everything. You're a full service. A security officer, I'm assuming they're unarmed, they really can't do a lot.
And
just to clarify, sorry, Wade, they're hiring these security guards after they're allowing these encampments to take place that are against university policy and law.
Yeah.
But so it's less offensive to these protesters to have this outside security company come in. Like UC police, I think they're supplemented by student assistants that are basically there just to provide customer service, like night escorts.
Yeah.
For young people walking to their car late at night type thing. But we're not having security guards on a day-to-day basis, just during these protest periods. And like I said, Humboldt had one officer on, no security.
So they're just hiring these security guards because of the protests and because they don't want the police to come in and tell them because you're offensive to the protesters.
They don't want us there. And they've said it. They straight say it. They think that's the incitement of the violence. But again, what is the recourse against these students? What sanctions are for these students and the faculty? And even Chancellor Beck from UCLA went in front of Congress and said, when they asked specifically about has anybody been suspended, he didn't know. The investigation's still continuing. Then they asked, are any of the faculty or staff on admin leave or been disciplined? They're saying not the police investigation, your investigation. And to date, there's nobody been suspended. You take Santa Cruz, they were a handful of them were charged with felonies for felony assaulting police officers, and they're back to school. They're back teaching on Monday, yesterday, and the students are back with no recourse other than a citation, except for the ones that are booked. But nowhere in there did those chancellors sanction any of them to this date today.
That's
not even one.
If that was about police officers, the media and everybody else would be demanding their pound of flesh, and why aren't you hours within hours of an incident, why isn't the officer on leave or fired or whatever? But we have educators who are promoting violence who get no recourse, and we call it freedom of speech.
I speak to someone in a rude way on a traffic stop. I might be on admin leave or getting written up 3 different ways. But these faculty who are inciting these things, I mean, I have body cam video of these professors telling them, don't touch my students, and fighting and kicking. And for nothing to happen, for them to for when they left and got cited out, one of the professors said, see you in class, everybody. And she wasn't wrong, because so it's like anything else. If there's no recourse for anything that they do, it's going to continue. And again, that's why I keep saying, and I've said it before after UCLA, the university holds the responsibility for everything that happens, because there's no punishment for what they're doing, or if it is, it's extremely small, and they allow it to occur. Now, I caveat that with, we are a specialized police department, so we completely recognize free speech. We're very giving. We'll provide areas for you to be at. We'll stay completely out of the way. We totally respect the First Amendment. We respect the rights of everybody, and we're glad that they do it. The university is a place for you to do that. We know this. But when it's done and it causes violence or is going to be violent, that's where we need to lay our foot down and say, no, it's not going to happen. But they just don't do it.
Well, even beyond these universities, there's a lot of sympathetic DAs that simply do not charge these lower level offenses. Not until it gets to the point where somebody's hurt will they take action. But It's basically no consequences either at the university administratively or in the criminal court. They face a greater penalty for running a red light.
We're seeing that in society as a whole, right? There's no accountability anymore, whether you're committing a crime, hurting somebody, doing stuff on campus. There's no accountability anymore with pretty much anything, which it seems to exacerbate the problem, right? And so, like I often, Brian's heard me say this 1,000 times, is like our legislators and our leaders, if you will, are out there trying to create utopia, but in the process they're creating dystopia. And this is what we're seeing on the campuses and some of these other locations. It's straight dystopian society. What's going on? That's not freedom of speech. It's ugly. It's disgusting.
And what I hate to see is what's happening now is because of the decisions that the university are making, they're calling for mutual aid from cities and counties to assist. And they're not wanting to help, not because they don't want to help, but because they don't want their officers to end up like us. They don't want their officers to be thrown under the bus. Completely agree. Who's going to pay their workers' comp when they get hurt in that situation? The city's going to have to pay them for the rest of their life. They don't want them to get hurt because of this, because of what the universities allow. And so it's now becoming difficult to get mutual aid because sheriffs and chiefs are saying, no, until if we come in, it's our way. It's not going to be your way. And the university doesn't want to agree with that. And I agree with them. I don't want them coming in and getting hurt. We signed up for this at the university, but I totally get it.
Well, the initial response at Humboldt took 90% of that county's law enforcement for that event to respond to. So 90% of the county had no law enforcement for that entire evening.
Yeah.
And it's just insane.
Well, based on everything that we've talked here, we obviously have identified serious issues. California Faculty Association is problem number one. The chancellors and the presidents clearly are not seeing the red flags. But moving forward, what would you think we could present, or what do you think, based on your experiences and knowledge, to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future?
I think there needs to be some laws that are passed to mandate funding for public safety in these university settings. I think it's too few and far between, these events, and like Wade said, they forget. I hate to say it, they love the local control, but when they get the control, they don't know what to do with it. So I don't know if laws need to change and the control needs to be more centralized, like for instance at UC out of the president's office and not at these individual campuses. Because what I've kind of seen, I don't know if you guys, Wade, if you agree, after the Ferguson incident, there was a chancellor and a president that were fired. There were student protests. There was racial graffiti in bathrooms, things that presidents and chancellors can't control. They responded, probably appropriately. The students marched, and ultimately they were both forced out. I noticed a seismic change after that event. Their number one concern is keeping their jobs.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I don't have all the answers. I do know that funding is a part of it, mandated training.
It seems like there should be, and I don't know what this fix would be, and obviously it's a slippery slope, but there needs to be some autonomy for a police chief who's in charge of a university, and it's under his guidance to keep the community, that community safe. The students and everybody else in that's his job to do so. And we know that they get undermined, and they're not allowed to do the things that they need to do to make sure they're keeping people safe. There seems like there should be something that gives some autonomy to where the chancellors and those folks in charge, you can give some direction, but the chief still has some ability to say, no, I have a job to do, and I'm going to do this without being worried of being removed from his position by that.
Absolutely.
So,
and it could be some type of mechanism that's triggered in a state of emergency,
yeah,
where the chief has the ultimate authority at that point.
Yep.
Because we've seen they're held accountable even though they're not fully in charge. The UCLA chief, I don't know what Wade's personal opinion is. I think FUPOA came out against that termination.
Yeah.
The interim chief at Humboldt was just terminated.
Well, it's interesting now because UCLA hired Rick Brazil to be this director of public safety position.
That's just to get him out of the damage that was caused by the campus administration.
But why can't the chief do it?
Yeah, let me get into that before I'll answer your question. And I have a comment on that, but let me answer you. Yeah, no kidding. Your question. We've been saying that for years because you have 10 different UCs, 10 different campuses, 10 different, technically by post, 10 separate police departments, but yet we're all one. But 10 chiefs all get together and all have an opinion. And there's not one opinion that matters more than the other. And so a lot of times things can't get done. And what we've been saying for years is, why don't we have like a commissioner of sorts, right? And just combine our university. Of course the university doesn't want that, because they don't want a Riverside campus who may be, a little bit, a little liberal versus Berkeley, who's a lot, they want to be able to have their own kingdom, we say. We say it's 10 campuses, 10 kingdoms. And they want their own individual control. And it's a struggle to even do that. But we've been fighting for one, basically like a commissioner that can basically have that relationship with the regents, with the office of the president, our president, to be able to make calls, get the money that we need, stop relying on local campus money to get the training, and be able to have that. Now, moving back to what you were asking before Rick Brazil, obviously we have university police officers. They are experts. Every one of them is an expert or becomes an expert in First Amendment, free speech, and dealing with protests, mobile field force. We have an SRT team, a mobile field force. Cal State has a mobile field force. We are trained. We're specifically trained in de-escalation, the laws, everything else, and how to respond in a unique situation that we have to deal with. And we are all experts in that. The problem is that nobody wants to fund it, even though our Robinson-Edley report says who's going to be involved, what we need to have happen and do. They leave it on the local campuses to provide funding. Local campuses don't want to give any more because they won't admit it, still under the defunding of police, especially on university campuses. They're not going to give us any more than we already had. A lot of us are running into the red as usual because they don't want to give us more because they're going to take crap from everybody else on campus. But our SRT team hasn't trained together in 4 years. And our equipment is over 10 years old, a lot of it. And so now this happens, and I hear we're ordering all new SRT equipment. That's not the answer. The answer is ongoing funding from the University of the President. They have to set money aside for training and for equipment. And that's what's going to help us to respond. Going back to the Rick Brazil now, going to your last one. Yes, the university panics. They're always going to panic because it's all coming to a head and they got to figure out what to do. I've said, why do you need somebody with 40 years law enforcement coming in to oversee another chief with 40 years of law enforcement, and tell me how that's going to work cohesively? Yeah. Tell me how you're going to be able to come to a common ground, a common goal. So what are you there for? And I think what's happening is he's there to, unscrew everything and kind of reevaluate, but why wasn't it done by this chief? And I think those are the real questions that have to be asked, and they're not being answered.
But here's the question, though, because we talked about it earlier about the specialization of your jobs. How do you bring a chief that's never even done university policing, let alone any type of school policing, is now all of a sudden, hey, you got to just take care of all of this? It seems like they should have reached out to somebody that was maybe previous university or California State chief of police at one time to be able to be like, hey, I can dive into this and try to figure this out more collaboratively, versus taking a municipal chief and trying to figure that out.
I think they were, in my opinion, I think they were just trying to find somebody who ran a big agency who's dealt with a lot of big things. But again, here we go where the campuses don't want that. They don't like LAPD. They don't like the big cities. And they, in fact, in our campus safety plan, they don't want other cities helping. They want us to be able to do it. So here you have a chief that has years of experience, and especially, he had LAPD, but years of experience at USC, and completely understands, the higher education system, come in and do things. And now you have to bring someone from the outside with no experience in, and you have to ask why. And it's, again, going back to where the universities are panicking on what they need to do and what they think they need to do to fix things. And what is going to get fixed out of this, I don't know, because we're still in the middle of this independent investigation. So
they love to create commissions and reports to get past the news cycle. And then
Yes.
they get this big report and they do absolutely nothing with it.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, there's no mandated funding. It's just like, hey, we've all come to this agreement on what we need to do next time, and then next time comes.
It's so funny because
Yeah.
there's so many of these commissions and reports that they forgot all about the Robinson Edley report until I brought it up in the news after UCLA. You had the Robinson Edley report, the President's Task Force on Policing, the Community Safety Plan. I mean, this is all since then. So they completely forgot about what's guiding them in protest situations, because all you do is under the cover of, we'll just get through this, we'll create these reports and these commissions.
Well, I think we'll have to end it there. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Appreciate
It's a
you
start.
both coming in. Yeah, you know, I think you've identified some possible legislation we can run next year to support what you guys are doing on the campus.
Be great.
You know, it may be successful, it may not, but hopefully it creates that greater conversation. I know Wade and I wrote an op-ed I think is important to continue the dialogue and a much more collaborative approach on this. I think the difference between like the California Faculty Association and us is the fact that we want to work collaboratively. We want to keep the students safe. We want to keep the community safe, where they just want to agitate and create violence and create divisiveness amongst the students and the police that's keeping them safe. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the latest episode of On the Job with PORAC with Wade Stern and Matt Kroner. We hope you enjoyed it. As always, we'd like to close this podcast by thanking all our PORAC members and our nation's law enforcement. We hope you stay safe and have a great day.